Okay, at this point, I'm pretty sure Dino Crisis was Capcom's experimental franchise. Throw something at a wall and see if it sticks. Each Dino Crisis game is stranger than the last, both in terms of gameplay and in the story. Maybe especially the story. There's no consistent theme here at all, other than time-traveling, dinosaurs, and guns. But even those aspects go way off the rails. However, for where it counts, Dino Stalker is actually pretty cool. It's got a couple of major flaws, but it does manage to avoid the pitfalls of Resident Evil Survivor and Dead Aim, while also standing out in comparison to other light gun games. For once, this might actually be worth checking out if you're a fan of the light gun genre. Dino Stalker picks up right after Dino Crisis 2, and there's so much to go over with that game's ending that I'm sorry, I'm not even gonna bother. The opening does cover it briefly, specifically the Noah's Ark project where a bunch of dinosaurs were taken from the past and transported millions of years into the future, but that's just scratching the surface with the absurdity. For now, I'll just focus on Dino Stalker. The game opens up with Mike Wired, a World War II ace fighter pilot who is shot out of the sky and is just about to die, when all of a sudden he gets transported to Dinosaur Land. He also receives a complimentary future gun and fancy wristwatch from out of nowhere. Paula from Dino Crisis 2, or Pola according to the instruction booklet, she shows up and the two of them go on an adventure to restore the timeline by killing a bunch of dinosaurs. That's about all you really need to know, but seriously, the story gets absolutely nuts. It's something you gotta play for yourself. You might be asking where Regina is at. Well, she was only in the first two games, and she's arguably not even the main character of the second one. However, she did manage to get her name on the high score list, along with Nemesis, and Leon's best friend. I can't believe they're making that reference. The overall presentation of the game isn't half bad. I mean, the voice acting is abysmal, and the pre-rendered graphics for the cutscenes aren't the greatest. There are also no subtitles, and the audio mixing is very poor, once again. Thanks for that, Capcom.
Lieutenant Wire. Lieutenant Wire. Can you hear me?
Who said that? What the heck is going on here?
You have no time to waste. You are the only one that can prevent the catastrophe.
What are you talking about? I don't understand what you're saying.
However, the game as a whole does look pretty good. Environments are varied, including levels where you fall from the sky, walk through a jungle, there's also a desert, and you ride through river rapids, among some other areas. A lot of stuff is destructible with goodies hidden inside, a common staple for light gun games, and all of the enemy types basically return from Dino Crisis 2. So there's not too much in the way of surprises, but the variety overall is good enough. As for the audio, this is a note of interest that I feel I should bring up. I guess Capcom, Sega, and Nintendo all license their generic sound effects from the same sources? These sound effects were instantly recognizable to me, and it blew my mind. Dino Crisis has already been a strange franchise, but I wasn't expecting this. On to the gameplay, Dino Stalker jumps between two variations. A more traditional light gun game that has the player spinning in place under their control, and more freeform exploration that plays like a simplistic first-person shooter. Along the way, various special weapons are obtained, either given to the players if they're on rails or collected via exploration. Same goes for the healing items and tachyon crystals, which are used to extend the time limit. If time runs out, it's game over. The more traditional on-rail segments, I would argue, are when the game is at its best. It's a pretty bare-bones rail shooter, but spinning in place does add a little more to it, and the radar on the bottom of the screen warns you of incoming dangers. So it's a small addition, but it is pretty cool, and it adds a little bit of depth to the game. There are definitely better on-rails light gun games out there, but this one's not too bad. That being said, the levels that allow for freedom of movement are a lot more interesting, even if they're not totally pulled off so well. Even though movement is like a very basic first-person shooter, there's hardly any limitations on the light gun aspect. It's easy enough to aim and shoot, and the fire rate for the basic handgun is about as fast as you can pull the trigger. Unlike Resident Evil Dead Aim, where you need to constantly jump between third and first-person viewpoints in order to position yourself properly, Dino Stalker is permanently in first person, and the pacing of the action feels just right. It's fast enough to stay exciting, but slow enough so the player can keep track of everything that's going on. The enemy AI is a little inconsistent. Sometimes they'll attack your blind spot, which makes sense, and other times they'll graciously run in front of your line of sight in order to give you a fair chance. For the most part though, a lot of aspects about the game do manage to come together fairly well. The various special weapons are great, the player is constantly given them and only one can be held at a time, so it's encouraged to either use them or lose them. They go from the conventional shotgun and grenade launchers to ridiculous sci-fi weapons that cause enemies to instantly warp from existence. I also love the reload animation for the Magnum revolver. The bullets actually tumble off the screen before getting replaced. Really great attention to detail. The level design for these segments is basic, but there is some effort here. There are pits to fall down in, bonus items hidden in alcoves, and even some areas with specialized mechanics. In the tall grass, raptors will constantly respawn and rush you from a distance, while the desert will have these guys popping out of the sand. Since the controls don't allow for vertical camera movement, the game will automatically aim at the enemy that is horizontally centered. It would seem like a simple and effective solution, but it's pretty annoying. In the worst circumstances, the camera frequently bops up and down. If the game were instead designed so that no enemy can be vertically off screen, then this would be so much better. But that's not what we get. There's also a sniper rifle that can be used at any time, but the animation to aim it is so long that I'd rather just run up to a dinosaur and blast away. Some of these issues I can excuse, but there's one serious fatal flaw of Dino Stalker: the controls. Or rather, the controller itself. Due to the way the buttons are spread out across the GunCon 2 controller, it's really uncomfortable to move with the D-pad, strafe with the side buttons, and aim and fire at the same time. And you better get used to strafing effectively, as it's the only way you can dodge attacks. Light gun games are already bad enough about your arms getting sore just from aiming at the TV for a while, but they're also meant to be very simple. With Dino Stalker, your hands are guaranteed to get cramped up in no time. This wasn't as bad in Dead Aim because that game separated the segments for moving and shooting. But Dino Stalker has the two going on simultaneously, and you need to get good at it in order to play effectively. I like what they were attempting here, and it is cool to strafe around the battlefield in order to avoid enemy attacks while firing at the same time with the light gun. But again, it's so uncomfortable. This would have been a lot more doable with the GunCon 3 controller instead, and it's a terrible shame that it never worked out. The GunCon 3 wasn't even a light gun, it used motion controls, so that's way worse than proper light gun technology. And besides, they barely made any games for the thing anyway. Dino Stalker is a great proof of concept, but it was way too ahead of its time. Nowadays, you can achieve something similar and far more effective with modern virtual reality technology. And while it's not as good as the almost one-to-one accuracy of a proper light gun, it at least does control a lot better. There's not a whole lot else to talk about with Dino Stalker. There's only the base campaign with no extras like branching paths, for example. And there's no additional content aside from the unlockable duo mode. In this mode, one player controls movement using a standard controller, while the other shoots with the light gun. It's basically the developers admitting that the controls are terrible, and here's a way to smooth things over if you have a buddy. Regardless, despite having a custom title screen, it's literally just the main campaign all over again. And you don't unlock this unless you've beaten the game once already, so what's the point? There's also a harder difficulty, and just like Dino Crisis 2, it is nigh impossible, although for different reasons. Enemies are way more aggressive, and the time limit is much stricter. So a balance of both quick and careful play is needed to preserve your health and save time. The problem is that both health items and tachyon crystals seem to pop up completely at random. At first, I believe that maintaining a high combo would help, which the game itself advises, but as far as I can tell, it only works in specific circumstances, if at all. Getting through a stage, you can have plenty of health but no time left over, or vice versa. Or you get lucky and you find a good weapon to waste a boss almost instantly. You just have to keep retrying over and over, and God forbid you miss even one of those blue tachyon crystals. If you did, you already lost if the enemy decides to never drop them. Look at how high my combo gets, and the game just forces me to lose. I had enough. I had to quit on hard mode right there. I did not have the patience for this, not to mention how badly this game causes my arms to cramp up. The normal difficulty is fine though. It provides enough of a challenge, and it's fun enough during its best moments. Dino Stalker isn't the greatest, but it is really interesting. If Capcom wasn't as ambitious and they instead made a more traditional rail shooter while leaning on their gimmick of spinning around in place, then this game would have been a lot better. The on-foot segments aren't poorly implemented, but jerry-rigging the Guncon 2's controllers to make it work wasn't the right solution. The lack of content doesn't help either. As awful as Resident Evil Survivor was, at least it had some minor form of branching paths. But, with all that said, with all the terrible flaws, Dino Stalker is definitely worth playing for light gun enthusiasts. This is probably the best off-rails light gun shooter ever made, but it's not like the competition was stacked in the first place. On the other hand, if you're already not that big into light gun games, then don't expect this one to change your mind. Thanks for watching my review on Dino Stalker, and a special thanks to Recommended Playing for giving me a copy of the game to review. Everyone go check out his channel, he's got some great stuff.